Madison's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the wooden desk as she glared at the girl standing beside her. The new student, Serenity Washington, stood quietly with her books clutched against her chest, while 30 pairs of eyes watched the tension build in Jefferson High's honors chemistry class. Madison's voice cut through the silence like a knife as she sneered, "I don't think so, sweetie. This desk has been mine since freshman year, and I'm not about to give it up to someone like you. So why don't you find somewhere else to sit?" The classroom fell deadly silent as Serenity's dark eyes flashed with something that made even the bravest students take a step back because they had no idea they were witnessing the moment that would change everything at Jefferson High. Forever. Serenity took a deep breath and spoke in a voice so calm it sent chills down everyone's spine. "I'm going to ask you one more time to please move from my assigned seat because Mrs. Henderson clearly pointed to this desk when she told me to sit here." Madison laughed loudly and made sure everyone could hear her cruel words. "Oh, please, like I'm scared of you and your little attitude problem. Maybe you should learn some respect before talking to people who actually belong in this school, unlike some people who probably got in here through charity." The words hung in the air like poison as Serenity's jaw clenched tight and her hands slowly released the books that fell to the floor, with a loud crash that made everyone jump. What Madison didn't know was that Serenity Washington wasn't just any new student, because her father, Marcus Washington, was the most feared man in all of Los Angeles and controlled half the city from his empire, built on both legal businesses and underground connections that reached into every corner of the streets. Serenity had spent her whole life trying to be normal and stay away from her father's world. But she carried herself with a quiet strength that came from growing up around people who commanded respect through both fear and loyalty. She had transferred to Jefferson High, hoping for a fresh start where nobody knew her last name. But Madison's ignorant words were about to shatter that dream into a million pieces. Mrs. Henderson rushed over when she saw the tension building, and her voice shook as she tried to calm the situation. "Girls, please, let's all just take our seats and we can sort this out calmly because there's no need for any conflict in my classroom." Madison stood up slowly and crossed her arms while staring directly at Serenity with pure hatred in her blue eyes. "I'm not moving anywhere, and if she has a problem with that, then maybe she should transfer to a school that's more suitable for people like her because this is Jefferson High, not some inner-city dump." The cruel words echoed through the classroom as students gasped, and some even pulled out their phones to record what they thought would be just another high school drama. Serenity's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but every word carried the weight of years spent watching her father handle disrespect. "You have no idea who you're talking to right now, but you're about to find out why respect isn't something you can buy with Daddy's money. Because real respect is earned through actions, not bank accounts." Madison rolled her eyes and laughed even louder while gesturing to her designer clothes and expensive jewelry. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Call your gangster friends or maybe threaten me with some street justice because news flash, princess, this isn't your neighborhood, and your little threats don't scare anyone here." The moment Madison said those words, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted because Serenity's expression changed from calm patience to something that made even Mrs. Henderson take several steps backward. Serenity slowly walked closer to Madison until they were face to face and spoke in a voice that was barely audible, but somehow filled the entire classroom. "My name is Serenity Washington, and my father owns half of this city, including the building your daddy's law firm rents space in, downtown, so I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." Madison's face went completely white as the blood drained from her cheeks because even someone as sheltered as her had heard whispers about Marcus Washington and his reputation on the streets of Los Angeles. But Madison's pride wouldn't let her back down, even as fear crept into her heart. So she pushed forward with more cruel words. "I don't care who your daddy thinks he is because money from illegal activities doesn't make you special, and it certainly doesn't give you the right to come into our school and act like you own the place." The classroom erupted in gasps and whispers as students realized they were watching something much bigger than a simple seating dispute because everyone could feel the dangerous energy radiating from Serenity, who stood perfectly still like a coiled spring, ready to explode at any moment. Serenity pulled out her phone and made a call that would change everything as her voice remained deadly calm. Daddy, I need you to make a few calls because someone at my new school seems to think they can disrespect our family name without consequences. Madison watched in growing horror as Serenity spoke quietly into the phone while never taking her eyes off the girl who had just made the biggest mistake of her privileged life. Within minutes, Madison's own phone started buzzing with frantic calls and text messages that would shatter her perfect world into tiny pieces. Because Serenity's father didn't just talk about power, he wielded it like a weapon that could destroy lives with a single phone call. The first call came from Madison's father, whose law firm had just received notice that their lease would be terminated immediately unless they could pay triple the rent by the end of the week. The second call was to Madison's mother, whose charity organization suddenly found all their permits under investigation by the city. The third call was to the principal, who received a very polite but firm suggestion from some very important people that maybe Madison needed to learn about respect and consequences for her actions. Madison's perfect world was crumbling around her as she realized that Maya Washington wasn't just talking about power. She was power, and the girl she had tried to humiliate was now systematically dismantling everything her family had built. Madison's hands shook as she answered call after call from panicked family members who couldn't understand why their entire lives were suddenly falling apart in the span of 30 minutes. Her father's voice cracked with fear as he begged her to explain what she had done to anger the wrong people, while her mother sobbed about losing everything they had worked for their entire lives. Madison looked at Serenity, who stood watching the chaos unfold with the same calm expression she had worn since walking into the classroom, and realized that she was completely and utterly powerless against someone who had been born into real strength, not the fake kind that came from money and social status. Mrs. Henderson tried desperately to regain control of her classroom, but she could see that something much bigger than a student conflict was happening as Madison collapsed into the desk she had refused to give up while tears streamed down her face. Serenity finally spoke again, and her words cut through Madison's sobs like a gentle but firm reminder. You see, Madison, the difference between you and me is that I never wanted to use my family's power because I came here to be just another student, but you forced my hand by choosing ignorance over kindness. The classroom watched in stunned silence as the girl they had seen as weak and powerless revealed herself to be someone who could destroy lives with a phone call, but chose not to until she was pushed too far. Madison looked up through her tears and saw something in Serenity's eyes that surprised her because instead of hatred or revenge, she saw disappointment and sadness, like Serenity was genuinely hurt by the cruelty she had faced. For the first time in her privileged life, Madison began to understand that her words and actions had real consequences for real people, and that the pain she caused others always came back to hurt her in ways she never expected. Serenity walked over to where Madison sat crying and spoke softly. I could destroy your entire family right now with one more phone call, but that's not who I want to be because my father taught me that real power comes from knowing when to use it and when to show mercy. The tension in the room shifted as Serenity continued speaking while the whole class listened with rapt attention. You judge me based on the color of my skin and assumptions about where I come from without knowing anything about who I really am or what I stand. For Madison wiped her tears and looked up at this girl who had every right to hate her, but instead was offering her something she didn't deserve, which was a chance to learn and grow from her mistakes. Serenity extended her hand toward Madison and spoke words that would echo in that classroom for years to come. I'm giving you a choice right now, Madison. You can keep being the person who hurts others to make herself feel better, or you can choose to be someone who builds others up instead of tearing them down. Madison stared at Serenity's outstretched hand while her mind raced with everything that had happened and slowly began to understand that this moment would define who she became as a person. She thought about all the times she had used her privilege to hurt others and realized that Serenity could have completely destroyed her, but instead was offering friendship and forgiveness. With shaking hands, Madison reached out and grasped Serenity's hand while speaking through her tears. I'm so sorry, Serenity. I was wrong about everything, and I don't deserve your kindness. but I want to be better than the person I was 5 minutes ago." The classroom erupted in surprised murmurs as they watched the most dramatic transformation any of them had ever seen happen right before their eyes. Serenity smiled for the first time since walking into the classroom and helped Madison to her feet while speaking words that would inspire everyone who heard them. "We all make mistakes, Madison, but what matters is what we do after we realize we were wrong, because that's when we show who we really are inside." Madison nodded through her tears and stepped away from the desk she had fought so hard to keep while gesturing for Serenity to take her rightful place. As Serenity sat down, Madison remained standing and addressed the entire classroom with a voice that shook with emotion. "I want everyone to hear this because I was wrong about Serenity, and I was wrong about a lot of things that I thought made me better than other people." The days that followed became a legend at Jefferson High as Madison and Serenity formed an unlikely friendship that surprised everyone who witnessed their dramatic first meeting. Madison used her family's connections and resources to help other students who needed support, while Serenity shared her strength and wisdom with anyone who felt powerless or alone. Together, they started a program that brought students from different backgrounds together to share their stories and break down the walls of prejudice and misunderstanding that divided their school. Madison's family learned valuable lessons about humility and using their privilege to help others, while Serenity found the normal teenage experience she had always wanted, surrounded by friends who valued her for who she was not, who her father was. But the transformation didn't happen overnight, and both girls faced challenges as they worked to build their friendship and heal the wounds that had been created by years of misunderstanding and hatred. Madison discovered that changing her heart was easier than changing her reputation, as many students remained suspicious of her motives and questioned whether her apology was genuine or just another act to protect her family's interests. She spent long nights lying awake thinking about all the people she had hurt with her cruel words and wondering if she would ever be able to make up for the damage she had caused over the years. Serenity helped her understand that redemption was a journey, not a destination, and that every day gave her a new opportunity to prove she had truly changed. The friendship between Madison and Serenity also created unexpected ripple effects throughout Jefferson High as other students began to examine their own prejudices and assumptions about people who were different from them. Carlos Martinez, who had always stayed quiet when he witnessed bullying, found the courage to speak up after watching Madison transform before his eyes. Sarah Chen, who had been afraid to share her struggles with anxiety, discovered that vulnerability could be a source of strength when she saw how honest Madison had been about her mistakes. Even the teachers began to change their approach to discipline and conflict resolution. After witnessing the power of forgiveness and genuine conversation between the two girls, the school principal, Dr. Williams called both girls into his office 3 weeks after the incident to discuss what had happened and was amazed by the mature way they handled the situation. Madison spoke openly about her family's history of unconscious racism and how growing up in privilege had blinded her to the struggles of others. Serenity explained how difficult it had been to carry the weight of her father's reputation, while trying to build her own identity as a young woman who wanted to make positive changes in the world. Dr. Williams realized that these two students had taught him more about leadership and conflict resolution in one conversation than he had learned in 20 years of educational training. Madison's parents, Richard and Patricia, initially resisted the changes they saw in their daughter because they feared that her friendship with Serenity would somehow tarnish their family's reputation in their exclusive social circles. Richard worried that his law firm's clients would question his judgment if they knew his daughter was friends with the child of someone like Marcus Washington. Patricia fretted about what her charity board members would think if they discovered that Madison was spending time with someone from such a different background. But as they watched Madison become more confident, compassionate, and genuinely happy, they began to understand that Serenity's influence was exactly what their daughter had needed. The turning point for Madison's parents came when Serenity invited them to dinner at her family's home, and they met Marcus Washington face to face for the first time. They had expected to meet a dangerous criminal, but instead found themselves talking to a brilliant businessman who had built legitimate enterprises while also using his influence to protect his community from violence and exploitation. Marcus spoke passionately about his dreams for his daughter's future and his hope that she would use her education to make positive changes in the world. Richard and Patricia left that dinner with a completely different understanding of what family, loyalty, and community responsibility really meant. Serenity's relationship with her father also evolved as she learned to balance her desire for independence with her appreciation for the lessons he had taught her about strength and resilience. Marcus had always worried that his reputation would make it impossible for Serenity to live a normal life, but watching her handle the situation with Madison convinced him that his daughter had inherited his strength without his anger. He began to share more stories about his own journey from the streets to success and helped Serenity understand that power could be used to protect and uplift others rather than simply to intimidate enemies. The friendship between Madison and Serenity became a model for other students who were struggling with similar conflicts and misunderstandings throughout Los Angeles. Word spread about what had happened at Jefferson High, and soon other schools were inviting the girls to speak about their experience and share the lessons they had learned. Madison talked honestly about the privilege that had blinded her to other struggles, while Serenity spoke about the importance of giving people chances to grow and change. Together, they created workshops that helped young people recognize their own biases and develop empathy for those who seemed different from them. Mrs. Henderson watched the transformation of her classroom and her students with amazement and pride as she realized that the most important lesson of the year had nothing to do with chemistry, formulas, or lab experiments. She began incorporating discussions about respect, diversity, and personal growth into her curriculum. After seeing how hungry her students were for honest conversations about the issues that really mattered in their lives, the desk that had sparked the original conflict became a symbol of how small moments of courage and forgiveness could create lasting change in people's hearts and minds. Madison's journey of redemption continued as she worked to repair relationships with other students she had hurt over the years and discovered that some wounds took longer to heal than others. Jessica Rodriguez, who had been the target of Madison's cruelty during sophomore year, remained skeptical of her transformation and refused to accept her apology. Madison learned that forgiveness couldn't be demanded or expected, but had to be earned through consistent actions over time. She continued reaching out to Jessica with small acts of kindness and support without expecting anything in return, because she understood that healing damaged relationships required patience and humility. Serenity faced her own challenges as she tried to balance her growing popularity and leadership role with her desire to remain true to her values and family loyalties. Some students expected her to use her father's influence to solve every problem at school, while others worried that getting too close to her might somehow put them in danger. She learned to set boundaries while still being supportive, and discovered that true friendship meant accepting people for who they were rather than what they could do for each other. Her friendship with Madison taught her that the most meaningful relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than fear or obligation. The annual Jefferson High Talent Show became a turning point for both girls as they decided to perform together. Despite warnings from some students and parents that their friendship was just a publicity stunt, Madison wrote a poem about her journey from prejudice to understanding, while Serenity composed music that reflected her experience of trying to find her own identity while living in her father's shadow. Their performance brought the entire auditorium to tears as they shared their story through art and proved that genuine transformation was possible when people had the courage to be vulnerable and honest with each other. The success of their talent show performance led to invitations to speak at community events, churches, and other schools throughout Los Angeles, where their message of hope and redemption resonated with audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Madison discovered that sharing her story of mistakes and growth helped other young people who were struggling with their own prejudices and bad choices. Serenity found that her experience of forgiveness and second chances inspired adults who had given up on the possibility of positive change in their own communities. Together, they proved that the most powerful stories were often about ordinary, people choosing to do extraordinary things. As their senior year approached, both Madison and Serenity began thinking about their futures and how they wanted to use their experiences to make a difference in the world. Madison decided to study social work and law with the goal of helping young people who had made similar mistakes learn from their choices without having their lives destroyed by them. Serenity chose to pursue education and community development because she wanted to create opportunities for young people to succeed regardless of their family, backgrounds, or neighborhood circumstances. Their friendship had taught them that individual transformation could become the foundation for broader social change. The graduation ceremony at Jefferson High became an emotional celebration of growth and transformation, as Madison and Serenity delivered the co-valedictorian speeches that they had written together. Madison spoke about the danger of assumptions and the power of listening to perspectives different from our own. Serenity talked about the importance of using whatever strength and privilege we have to lift others up rather than tear them down. Their words echoed throughout the auditorium as parents, teachers, and fellow students recognized that these two young women had learned lessons that would serve them well throughout their lives. Mrs. Henderson often told other teachers about the day that changed her entire perspective on teaching because she learned that the most powerful lessons happen when students teach each other about courage, respect, and forgiveness. Stories spread throughout Jefferson High and then to other schools of students shared the video of Madison's public apology and Serenity's gracious response on social media, where it inspired millions of people around the world. Madison and Serenity both graduated as valedictorians and went on to start a foundation that helps young people overcome prejudice through education and understanding, while proving that the most unlikely friendships often become the strongest bonds. Years later, when people asked Serenity about that day in chemistry class, she always said that seeing Madison choose to change herself was more powerful than any display of force or revenge could ever be. Madison became a civil rights lawyer who dedicated her life to fighting injustice, while Serenity became a teacher who helped young people find their own strength without needing to use fear or intimidation. Their friendship became a symbol of hope that proved people can change if they're willing to face their mistakes and choose love over hate. The desk they fought over still sits in Mrs. Henderson's classroom with a small plaque that reads, "The place where two enemies became friends and changed the world," reminding every student who sees it that respect, understanding, and forgiveness are the most powerful forces in the universe. The story of Madison and Serenity proves that even in our darkest moments, when prejudice and hatred seem to win, we all have the power to choose something better. Their friendship reminds us that real strength comes not from the ability to destroy others, but from the courage to forgive them and help them become better people. Every day we face choices between building walls or building bridges, between spreading hatred or spreading love, and between using our power to hurt others or to heal the world around us. Madison and Serenity chose healing and forgiveness, and in doing so they created ripples of positive change that continue to inspire people everywhere to believe that transformation is always possible when we have the courage to extend our hand to those who have hurt us and show them a better way to live. Madison and Serenity's story did not end with high school, because the day they clasped hands in that tense chemistry classroom became the seed of something far greater than either of them could have predicted. And as they moved forward into adulthood, their bond was tested and strengthened by trials, triumphs, and choices that would shape not only their futures, but the futures of those around them. For when two young women from such different worlds found a way to forgive, to listen, and to build together, the ripple effects were boundless. College brought new challenges, with Madison at first struggling to shed the label of the rich girl who once bullied, and Serenity fighting to define herself outside the shadow of her father's empire. Yet, together they discovered that vulnerability could be a source of power, and that the best way to silence critics was not with arguments, but with undeniable proof through their actions and accomplishments. So Madison buried herself in law books, staying up late to master every case study, while Serenity worked tirelessly in community development programs, tutoring children in underfunded schools and mentoring girls who felt overlooked. And in each other, they found a steady reminder that growth was not about perfection, but persistence. When Madison faltered under the weight of guilt from her past, Serenity reminded her that redemption is a journey made of small, consistent steps. And when Serenity feared she would never escape the stereotype of being Marcus Washington's daughter, Madison reminded her that her strength came from within, and that her future would be defined not by whispers, but by choices. And so they pressed forward, slowly carving paths that intertwined more deeply than ever before, until one day their work converged in a project that would change countless lives. For Madison had taken an internship at a civil rights firm, where she witnessed case after case of young people being written off for mistakes that were more about circumstance than character. And Serenity was working with schools where those very same young people were struggling against cycles of poverty, prejudice, and neglect. And in a late-night phone call filled with tears and laughter, they realized that the answer was not for each of them to fight separately, but to build something together that would bridge the gap between justice and opportunity. Thus, the Washington Carter Foundation was born, named after Serenity's family name and Madison's mother's maiden name, a partnership that drew from both of their strengths, one offering legal defense and advocacy for youth, while the other created mentorship, education, and community programs to prevent those youth from ever falling through the cracks in the first place. The foundation began small with just a handful of volunteers and a borrowed office space. But like all things born from sincerity and passion, it grew rapidly as people from every walk of life saw the fire in their eyes and felt compelled to join the mission. And soon they were traveling the country giving talks, raising funds, and more importantly, changing lives one case and one classroom at a time. And through it all, their friendship deepened into something like sisterhood, tested by disagreements over strategy, over exhaustion, over personal heartbreaks, but never broken. Because at the core, they carried the memory of that first moment when one extended her hand in forgiveness and the other accepted with humility, and that memory reminded them that nothing was more powerful than choosing compassion over pride. Marcus Washington himself, once feared as a ruthless power broker, found in his daughter's path a chance for his own redemption, investing his influence and resources into the foundation while quietly stepping back from the shadows of his old life. And Richard and Patricia Carter, once anxious about appearances, became some of the most vocal advocates for the work, their transformation, a testimony to the fact that even deeply ingrained prejudice could be unraveled through love and understanding. But of course, the journey was not without pain, for with visibility came resistance. And there were critics who accused Madison of using her privilege as a shield and Serenity of exploiting her father's reputation. And sometimes those criticisms cut deep, threatening to undo years of healing. Yet every time they returned to the core truth that their lives were not about pleasing critics, but about serving those who needed them, and in the quiet moments, when they stood in courtrooms beside trembling teenagers, or sat in school gyms filled with hopeful children, they saw proof that their work mattered more than the noise. Years later, as Madison stood in a crowded courtroom defending a boy who had been unfairly accused, and Serenity sat in the back with the boy's mother holding her hand, they exchanged a glance that carried years of shared history. And in that glance was the unspoken reminder that everything they had endured, everything they had sacrificed had led to this. A moment where justice and mercy could meet, because two girls had once chosen forgiveness in a classroom filled with tension. And as time went on, their story was told and retold, not just in Jefferson High, but across cities and communities, becoming almost legend. A reminder that the most profound revolutions begin in the smallest acts of courage. And though they each went on to build families of their own and pursue individual dreams, their lives remained forever entwined through the foundation, through shared memories, and through the simple but powerful truth that they had once been enemies who chose to become friends. And that choice changed everything. In interviews and speeches, Serenity often said that power is not measured by how many people fear you, but by how many people trust you, while Madison reminded audiences that privilege is wasted if it isn't used to lift others. And together, their words sparked movements of change in schools, workplaces, and even government halls, because people listened not just to what they said, but to who they were. living proof that transformation is possible. And if you, dear reader or listener, take anything from their story, let it be this. Your past does not define you. Your mistakes do not cage you, and your prejudices, if you face them with courage, can be unlearned. Because every day you are offered the choice between cruelty and kindness, between walls and bridges, between tearing down and lifting up. And though it may not always be easy, the path of forgiveness and growth will always ripple outward farther than you can imagine. So if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Let their friendship inspire you to choose love in your own life. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us that even in a world divided by fear and misunderstanding, two people extending hands across the gulf can still change the world forever. And so, as Madison and Serenity's story shows us, true power is not in wealth, fear, or status, but in forgiveness, in courage, and in choosing love when hate seems easier. Their journey from rivals to sisters is a reminder that we can all rise above prejudice, mend what is broken, and build bridges that last a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Because together we can keep spreading stories that inspire, heal, and change the world.